Welcome to more unedited videos. I want to continue to talk about the things I touched on in my first video. Um, because I made the point, but it's a huge point to make. And so there's a lot of loose ends in what I said. And I feel it extremely important to drive these points home. Um, since the advent of the internet and especially AI, a lot of things, a lot of knowledge is becoming corrupted. And people honestly are losing touch with reality. So I'm here to remind you all and remind us collectively of why we're even here in the first place. Because that needs to be reminded. So this gets into, we're going to talk about nature, the natural state of man, the social contract. These are philosophical ideas that you can read more about. Just Google search them. Um, but the idea of the social contract. Why did we come out of the woods in the first place? Now, if you go back to the beginning of civilization and you go back to where we switched over from being hunter gatherers to sedentary agrarian societies, there was a certain amount of organizational structure required to do so, to plant crops and make sure that everything gets watered and tended and actually yields a harvest to justify sitting in one place. So the social contract is an idea that starts coming into play as to why we ascribe to civilization in the first place. So nature is in a state of chaos. Don't get me wrong, I worship nature as a god. But nature not only is the beauty of a butterfly's wing, it's also the ruthless brutality of a wolf ripping its prey's throat out. And anybody who's actually spent time living in nature knows it's extremely harsh. If you've ever seen any of these wild survival shows, Naked Survival, yeah, it's not all, tree hugging and, wonderful stuff as people tend to idealize it. I used to idealize it until I actually went out into the woods and did it myself. Um, so the social contract is the idea that we as people collectively surrender our power to a central authority to have less chaos in our life. So if the natural state is to, be at the mercy of the elements, getting together and, growing food and storing up calories is making, in essence, life more fair, life easier, life safer. And obviously, the archaeological record reflects this as we, had a population boom. Unfortunately, agriculture is what inadvertently spawned war. And I'll get more into that in a second. But the idea is that we did all this because it was more fair. Whenever anybody tells you life isn't fair, let me give you an argument, and it's a really good counter argument. Actually, life is supposed to be fair. That's why we all show up. That's why we all play by the rules. That's why we all pay taxes. So that life is a little bit more fair and a little bit more just. So, yes, actually, you can reasonably expect for life to be more fair. Otherwise, why are we doing this? If we aren't getting fed, if we aren't getting housed, if our basic needs are not being taken care of, if society and government is not making our lives more safe and less chaotic, why are we doing it? Now, I'd like to believe that the United States government is, everything it says it is, this pillar of freedom and, the mythos of how our country was founded and the noble founding fathers and the whole nine yards. But I know better than that. I know about the Virginia Corporation. I know that this country was founded, in fact, as a money-making enterprise and as a corporation. When you drive into towns and it says incorporated 18, whatever the hell, they mean that, actually. Every single incorporated municipality, which is pretty much everything except the few little, what we jokingly call anarchist towns around here that are not incorporated, and they say it unincorporated on their signs. But every other one has their own credit system, Dun& Bradstreet. And guess what? Dun& Bradstreet goes all the way back to England. They're in America now, but they go all the way back to England. In fact, there was a Revolutionary War general, and I can't remember his name, who was once quoted as saying, "We'll have the Americas back within 100 years, and it'll be through the financial system." See, those screaming, "The Jews control it all," don't understand their history and the fact that this country was an English colony and it was exploited. Flat out. It was exploited. As were the Irish, as were any of the immigrants that were brought over here for indentured servitude. Um, yeah. And this has not changed. It is the corporate states of America. And people, I think, realize it, and you hear people talk about it, but I don't think people ever really get, they kind of glance off the real heart of the issue. And it's not that we've been taken over by corporations, it's that we were a corporation from the get-go. And corporations are all about sharing risk. See, the very first corporation was the East India Trading Company, an English company. They're what brought you the Boxer Rebellion and in China and the Opium Wars. They are what brought you India being exploited for its own cotton and having it sold back to them and Gandhi. They are just a bunch of dirty bastards. Okay? And they caused a lot of crap. I mean, you hear about them in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and actually, I kind of like it because it is a really good villain if you historically know anything about the East India Trading Company. But as I said, corporations are designed to share risk. If you're doing some sort of enterprise like shipping back and forth between the Americas in the 1700s when or 1600s, whenever it was, when your sailing vessels are, wooden and they shipwreck all the time, having some sort of legal structure that shares risk is ideal. But there are the shortcomings of corporations, and that is that you have a legal entity with no soul, with no head. I mean, there's a corporate head in the sense of you have your shareholders, you have your board of directors, you have a CEO, but none of them, it isn't them. It's something else. And that is controlled by its bylaws, by its organizational structure, what its purpose is. Um, Corporations in and of themselves don't necessarily have to be bad. In fact, those of you screaming socialism should understand that that's very socialistic in the sense of that we're all pooling our money together, having our own means of production or extraction in this case, and it works. Look at America, the economic powerhouse that America was for the last 250 years and still can be. Um, yeah. A few minutes ago, I said I was going to get into how agriculture causes war. And it's worth mentioning because corporations wage their own wars, economic wars, and we live with it. Um, so 10,000 roughly 10,000 years ago, we start building cities. And I forget how long ago it was that we discovered agriculture, but it wasn't much before that. And the thing is, hunter gatherers, women, okay, when a woman's cycle is dependent upon her weight, her woman's ability to bear children is dependent upon her weight. So if she is too skinny, she can't get pregnant. It's natural birth control. Any marathon runners, distance runners know this. In fact, I had it happen to me in junior high. I was 120 pounds and I'm 5'8". Um, so because of the scarcity of food that I had referenced, um, you quite possibly most of the time was not, as a female, would not be carrying enough weight to even get pregnant. Now, when we started growing food, when we started agriculture and sitting down and, growing extra calories, that changed. Suddenly, there's plentiful calories, and all of a sudden, as a result, there's a population boom. There's also the beginning of dental decay in the record because the foods that we started to consume, the sugars and the starches, were not normally what you would eat. I mean, we talk about paleo diet and stuff like that now, where you kick out any carbs. Well, agriculture is all about the carbs and storing up carbs. That's why we do it. I mean, wheat, barley, oats, whatever, even squash, things like that, potatoes, those are storable calories, but they are starches and sugars. So, in excess, they cause fat. In excess, they can cause cancer if they're refined. They cause tooth decay. So, there was a Pandora's box there that got opened. And it wasn't just decay. When you all of a sudden have a population boom, you have a bunch of babies, right? Well, those babies grow up. And those babies want to go out and make their own families and their own babies. And so you have this spreading effect that wherever geographically this hypothetical, family, first agrarian family is, you want to call them Cain and Abel, whoever, Cain and Abel actually kind of references this in an allegorical sense. Anyway, you have this spreading effect. And if you have more than one tribe, so to speak, eventually those tribes spread until they run into each other. And then you have a fight for resources. Then you have bloodshed. And this is why people need to go out to the woods and contemplate and stop just, being idiots, looking at their phone and just consuming and not thinking. Because it just repeats. I mean, where are we in terms of Israel and Gaza, Ukraine and Russia? Those are all resource wars. Everything, all wars throughout all humanity are resource wars. I mean, every once in a while somebody's got a beef. Like the Trojan War, somebody swiped somebody's wife. But more often than not, they're about resources. So these Judeo-Christian Muslim religions that advocate unbridled reproduction actually set the stage for their own Armageddons. Because, yeah, if you got all those babies are going to grow up. And those babies aren't going to play nice with each other when they start running out of food and resources. And then you got war. But Yahweh was an old Semitic war god. So, maybe y'all might want to wonder, what you're actually worshiping before you, become zealots for it. Yeah, thanks. So, yeah. We all got together and came out of the woods, so to speak, 10,000 years ago to make life more fair for the social contract. And corporations take that one step further in making business more fair, or maybe not more fair, but less risky. So again, it's kind of the same concept. People coming together to make something happen because it's easier when you work together in terms of, being able to store up resources, money, food, whatever. But that is really how it runs, folks. When we boil things down to basics, which we need to with all this extra noise these days, like everybody is just getting so far removed from reality. Everybody's just getting just pummeled with all these different messages and all the, oh, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, you gotta, it's this problem, it's that group of people. It's no, no, no. It all goes right back to the roots of why the hell did we ever come out of the woods and get together in the first place? And we've forgotten that. Good night.